Let's talk attachment styles. Okay, so I just had a mind yoga session with a client who acknowledged that they have an anxious attachment style. And so I wanted to speak into it because, unsurprisingly, there was talk of a partner who has an avoidant attachment style, and being able to understand each component and how they interplay with one another is so important, not just for dynamic, but for our own individual regulation, being able to manage ourselves in these situations. So let's break it down a little bit. There are, it's, it, it's late, my words. There are, in essence, two types of people: intrinsically focused and extrinsically focused. So an intrinsically focused person is going to be most likely your avoidant attachment style. They are the people who view the world through a lens of fear, and in order to feel safe, or they feel safest when they are not around other people. As a recovering anxious attachment style, what I notice is my nervous system is the most regulated when I'm by myself because no one else is affecting it. This also goes into my human design of being a reflector, where I'm very, very open. But the extrinsically focused people are typically the people who are the anxious attachment style. So these people view the world through a lens of shame, and in order to feel safe, or their nervous system to feel safe, they feel safer when they're around other people. This supports them in feeling safe. So the way that this intrinsic and extrinsic view of the world also is incorporated into this is this idea of self-worth and self-value. Or put another way, whether you define your value from an internal place or you define your value from an external source by people around you. You feel valued by others. Whereas an intrinsic person will create their value from within. They have a high self-worth but a low self-value. Whereas an extrinsically focused will have a high self-value but a low self-worth. It's the two sides of the coin. Ideally, we're looking for integrated, where you recognize that you have intrinsic value and you have a desire to be of value to the people around you, to your community. It's having both, but not being dependent on one or the other. What typically happens for an extrinsically focused person or an anxious attachment style is because they view the world through a lens of shame, they don't feel good enough for the people around them. They're constantly seeking validation by people external to themselves because they struggle to provide it for themselves. They struggle to provide and feel and find that sense of inner self-worth. And what typically happens is, because opposites can attract and we like to find the complementary, it's typically how we act as human beings, they will attract, or there will be an attraction to an avoidant attachment style. So as an anxious attachment style, you're looking for someone external to validate you. Typically, that person is going to be an avoidant attachment style. And the more you smother them, the more they're going to want space, because that's how they find safety. The true is for the inverse as well. So if you're an intrinsically focused person, you find your value from within, you view the world through a lens of fear, this idea of not being good enough, not the lens of shame, which is a very distinct difference. The lens of shame is, I'm not seen as good enough by others. Whereas an intrinsic is, I don't feel good enough within myself Very subtle but very important difference. So an introverted person will feel good within themselves and feel safest within themselves, and so want to create spaciousness to feel safe. And as a result, in creating space, typically with an anxious attachment style, that will trigger that person to want to encroach on that space, and so they will not have that safety that they're looking for. What's really required is for the two individuals to be in a place of integrated security. Okay, so the recognition that just because my avoidant partner is wanting space doesn't mean that I'm not lovable, or that they don't love me, or that they're going to leave me, that it's still safe. Because typically, if you just give, speaking as an avoidant, if you just give an avoidant some space, they'll come back. Because ultimately, even though there's a part of them that deeply finds safety in spaciousness, there's a very deep part of them that wants to feel connected. And so they will, when they do feel safe, come back. And what can happen is sometimes even just the offer of spaciousness is enough to regulate the nervous system so that they don't necessarily need the space at all, or just for a little bit of time, and then they can come back. It requires an awareness of this and then an ability to self-regulate. So as an avoidant attachment style, if I recognize that my partner is needing my support, I get to maintain my own sense of integrated integrity and go, okay, I know that this is what my partner needs right now. Even though spaciousness is what I would prefer, I know that it's safe to be with this person and help them regulate. Whereas an anxious attachment can just go, okay, I know that my partner needs space, I will give them that, and I know that I am safe because I know that everything is okay. Them having space doesn't mean that I don't have value. And so this is kind of what we're looking for in relational dynamics. But the first step is, one, knowing your own attachment style, or knowing if you're an intrinsic or extrinsically focused individual. The thing is, from a tantric point of view, we have the capacity for the full spectrum. The thing is, we have a proclivity, a leaning, a core essence, if you will, closer towards one or the other. It may be very, very little, or it may be a very, very lot, but it's there, and it's kind of like the core wound, or the essence of that individuation, the byproduct of the human experience, if you will. And so whilst we have the range to be intrinsic and extrinsic and anxious and avoidant, you know, I've been in dynamics where, as an intrinsically anxious attachment style, I've drifted into the as an intrinsically avoidant, I've drifted into the anxious because of that relationship dynamic. We can play with the polarities, and it's my belief that we switch depending on the different relationships that we're in. And ultimately, at our essence, we're either one or the other. And this is just the dualistic nature of reality. This idea in Tantra that whilst there is just one infinite, divine, transcendent consciousness, it expresses itself dualistically. And as a result, you're either one side of the coin or the other, like at a fundament. You have the capacity to switch because we have the capacity for the range, this full spectrum. And that's the joy of being a human being, even though it might not feel like it at times, especially when entrenched in the thralls of polarity and attachment style. But with having the tools to regain self-awareness, to peel away from the egoic nature, which is where the anxious and avoidant kind of resides and lives and is inherent, then there's the ability to detach from it and gain perspective and return to an integrated, healthy expression of essence nature, of being conscious awareness that's able to recognize these behaviors, these patterns, these conditions, and do the necessary work to undo the knots that have become attached to our sense of self as a result of the human experience. So what happens is, because we have this this leaning towards the intrinsic, extrinsic, or the anxious or avoidant, and we get it at a very young age, and typically the people that we're around, our parents or adults, they're unaware of this and unintegrated and secure themselves, and so they end up being triggered by their own challenges, which then results in us as babies, as human beings, reacting to their triggers in a way that complements our own, and we end up developing habits based on thought patterns, which then become unconscious behaviors. These programs that get installed at a young age of how to essentially return to a place of safety when dropped out of safety and into a dysregulated emotional state. So, for example, if as an avoidant attachment style, as a kid, my mum is my primary caregiver, would have been an anxious and so over nurturant, and so that would lead me to feel unsafe because her dysregulation would have created a dysregulation in me, and so safety was found through spaciousness. My nervous system to regulate. In understanding, there's another layer of people pleasing that comes into this, but that can be a different video. In my unconscious mind, recognizing this, it then entrenches the belief that I'm only safe when I'm alone, and so creates behaviors to promote that happening. And so then in later life, when I got into relationships and I was in situations where my nervous system was triggered and I went into a place of dysregulation, what my unconscious programming knew to do was just to get the hell out of there and, you know, avoid this person who has created the unsafety and find my sense of safety. But then obviously that triggered their nervous system, and it just goes round and round. What's the useful thing to do, and this is where the mind yoga comes in, it's possible to do it relatively alone. It's useful to have some sort of external support, whether it's this video or other information that you've acquired, but really having someone who can go on that journey with you to highlight those unconscious avenues, those mental emotional knots which present themselves when, for example, relational dynamics kind of rub up against them. It's kind of like life is really smooth until something happens and you notice that there's a knot in your mental, emotional unconsciousness, and figuring out how to smooth out that knot so that it doesn't bother you anymore and you can continue to move through life with ease is the way to deal with that. However, not everyone has the ability, capability, or the inclination to do that mental emotional digestion required for that. And that's the value of working with someone. And this is what I do in Mind Yoga. We identify those mental emotional knots. We create a safe space where you can explore them with me, and we can, in a safe way, in a way that works best for you, start to massage them out and replace those unconscious programs with conscious programs of how you want to behave in the world based on your fundamental truths. In understanding the truth that's no longer serving you, we get to supplant it with one that does from a conscious place. But it's challenging to do alone because it's like a Rubik's Cube that's fighting back, using the mind to overcome the mind. Having someone external to you to support in that is hugely beneficial. It's like trying to massage out your own knots in your body. In order to do that, you actually have to tense and engage to move yourself, and so you can't get the depth of relaxation required necessarily to smooth out that knot. And the same is true for mental emotional knots too. So that's the idea of intrinsic, extrinsic, anxious, avoidant. One has a view internally or defines value from within, and one has a view externally and defines value from without. We want to find that middle ground where we can remain in a place of integrated, intrinsic and extrinsic, from that healthy space. And if you're on that journey, I commend you. It's not an easy one to undertake, and the potential to continue to wobble is a real one, and know that wobbling is actually just part of the process. And this is why having someone to just nudge you back on track can be really valuable. So if you're curious to know more and want to massage out mental emotional knots, you just want to have a chat, then drop me a little message and we can get that happening.